So this is the chapter 7, which is serving a higher purpose. I hope everyone had a chance to read the chapter.
It's one of the shortest.
Okay, now let's see. I've got let me move this so I can see. So this is really a chapter of questions, and it probably all of you know, but this is David Bruce, who wrote our book, and David is our national secretary. He oversees the prison program. He oversees the International Lodge papers, because there are many people that are a member of the lodge. We can all be a member of the National Lodge. He oversees the lodge papers. And by the way, it's $10 for National Lodge dues. And the National Lodge sends out papers every month and lessons, and David writes those lessons. And I think the book that we're reading comes from the introduction to many of those lessons. Anyway, David just does too much, probably. Let's see. And so the first question is about time. And Madame Blavatsky talked about the infinite bosom of duration. And here is a quote from the stanzas of Dizon. Time was not, for it lay asleep in the infinite bosom of duration, the state of all one during pralaya, before the first flutter of reawakening manifestation. And pralaya, if you're not aware, is the time between incarnations. So there are several different kinds of time that we can experience. The one that we're most familiar with, and our culture tends to run on that, is chronological time. That's 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. It's very objective, it's predictable, it's measurable. But there's also a psychological time, and that psychological time is our relationship with time. How do we do we feel like a lot of time has gone by? Do we feel like a short time has gone by? And we've all had that experience where time seemed to drag, but we've also had the experience where time seemed to go by so fast there wasn't enough time. And when Blavatsky was asked to speak on the difference between duration and time, she said, time is finite, but duration is infinite. And so actually duration, it's somewhat of a time, but it's not the time that we're used to. So what is it that lives beyond this beyond this time? What is the mystery within us that endures? And do we have a sense of it? And have we even tried to find it? Because many of us have said, there has to be more. Is that all there is? And we tend to look outside for what it is. Is that all there is? We tend to go to philosophers, philosophies, to masters, to readings. But there's a time that once we've explored everything externally, we have to move inside and say, well, maybe there's something here. I know you've all heard the story when they said that the gods were creating, and they said, well, let's put divinity somewhere. And they said, well, where should we put it? And they said, I know, we'll put it inside humans because they'll never look there. And so this is actually a question about time. And so I'm going to open it up and ask if anybody has any comments about time, their relationship with time. Just open that question up, because these are questions that come about. Anyone have any comments on that particular question, or thoughts, or questions, or answers?
Before reading this particular section or topic, to me, the definition for duration has always been chronological. Literally, you have a beginning and ending. But it seemed like the definition that Pulaski given, duration is not so much an absolute measurement like that. It's more like a relative measurement. It's actually subjective and relative to the point of view of the subject. And that's the definition that I believe I have obtained from this particular topic, that a question to contemplate, essentially. I don't know, is that the same feeling everyone has or not?
Thank you.
Well, I guess I also have a similar idea about duration. That duration is the time between two events. But the way Blavatsky defines it is very different. So I guess we need to start thinking of duration as infinite expanse of time, instead of just time between two events. For instance, the people will ask, what's the duration of this meeting?
Say that again about the duration of this meeting. What?
I said some people might ask, what is the duration of this meeting? And then you might say, oh, maximum 2 hours. That's the normal definition of duration. So the way Blavatsky uses it is a little different from the normal definitions.
Yeah, she has to come up with a word that describes. There are two nows. We hear everything now about being mindful, about being present, about being here now. We hear a lot about that, but what a lot of people don't realize is exactly what Blavatsky is talking about. There's one be here now, chronological. Even when we're doing vipassana or mind, which is just mind observation, what we're using is chronological time and we're using physical senses. But there is another now, and that is the eternal now. And when we enter the eternal now, which is this duration now, what we lose is our ego, we lose our personality, we lose a sense of humanness, we become that expansive self. And so it's a very, this concept is really being impregnated into the culture now of this endless, timeless place in space that is our true home, not this chronological time space, not between 1948 and whenever I die. That is not my time. That is not my home. Mine is, in the first question that it asks is, what is the mystery within us that endures? That is really points to who we are, and it points to this endless time. Other comments or thoughts on this particular question? Does this relate at all to time travel? Have any of you been fascinated with the aspect of time travel? I think Einstein says it's true. I can't remember exactly how it is, but you know that if people go into space and they go a certain place, if it were possible for us to go to Mars, it means that maybe their time would be very different than the time here on Earth. And when people return from Mars, everybody here would be a different age than them. That's a sort of a time travel. Any people have thoughts about time travel? I believe that if there is something in the narrative, in the common narrative, because I think everybody's heard of time travel, whether they believe it or not, that the possibility exists, because I don't think anything that can be conceived can be created. And so we may not know how this can happen, but I do believe it can happen. Any more thoughts? Yeah, go on.
Can dreams be considered as a part of time travel? Because in dreams, you can travel instant to anywhere in the world. And So I don't know what they mean. If they mean by dream time travel, I guess all of us do that.
Well, that is a very interesting observation, John. In my belief system, I think that dreams are our awareness into different realities, and that those realities are just as real as this reality, because all of them are considered illusory because they're not eternal. And so I think that they all have they're all as real as. I had a dream one night that I really enjoy. It's been a guiding dream for me forever. And I had decided it was a lucid dream, and I had decided to do some things. I thought, well, I'm dreaming, so it doesn't matter what I do in my dream. And the teacher, because I was at a night school in this dream, and the teacher said, really, he said, A, you think you're dreaming me, which is a joke. And B, you don't think that you're responsible for what you do in your dreams. You are as responsible for what you do in your dreams as you are for what you do in what you call your waking state. So there's many more. William James, the psychologist, alluded to many more states of consciousness than we're aware of. It says we just screen these things out. And so we know just a tiny fraction of everything, which is okay, because we might be too confused and overwhelmed if we had an influx of all kinds of information, energy, realities at one time. We need to focus. I mean, we don't need to, it's like trying to watch a TV. If you had 10 televisions and you're trying to watch all of them at the same time, it wouldn't work out very well. And that's how it would be if we were trying to deal with all the realities that are possible that we could tune into. It is just too much. And so I think that, in my opinion, my experience is that the reason that I decided on this one reality was because it was just too confusing to try to be in more than one reality at a time. Any more thoughts? And if somebody speaks up and I might not hear you because you may have not muted yourself. So just know that if you don't get heard, just unmute yourself and interrupt.
Yeah, the term CU duration, I think it's more like cycle. So literally you had a feeling of deja vu. I don't know, you ever experienced deja vu? A sense that you have done this before? You've been there, you've done that, and this is just like another trial. That feeling of deja vu actually is it's some perception, right? A perception of the cycle. Look like this process or whatever happened to you, you had experienced it before, but for whatever reason it happened to be, maybe you failed to accomplish your goal earlier, and now it's just coming back. It's a lesson to be learned.
So that's one dimension of deja vu. And you're saying that you're equating that with duration.
Yes, because she seemed to say that duration is infinite. So if you're looking at cycle, there's a cycle going up and down, and then they kind of like eventually evolve, right? As you evolve over the different cycle, from a point of view of the overall process of evolution, that is infinite. You're literally doing the same thing over and over again. With each iteration, though, you improve, you evolve. It's always growing, and it's not the same as the previous one. Even though it look to be the same, it's infinite.
And so that would be that. I think that would be looking at the first question, and that is, what is the mystery within us that endures? I think that's the aspect you're talking about.
Yes, exactly.
Is that correct? Okay. Thank you.
And also, what I realize in your definition of duration, we have two big categories, space and time, but we can identify them only when we have somebody who identify. In space, it can be object. In time, it can be somebody who calculates the time. But duration, as you say, when we have out of human present, you know, because we can say psychological time, because I calculate, or hours time, because the earth go around sun 24 hours, but duration is outness of present of any calculations. It can be human calculation or star universe calculation in something as we call emptiness. It was the long tradition. You mentioned philosophers, as Hegel say about the nature of the time, is out of any time of object forms. It just pure nothing, something like this. What I understand duration is out of any human or form participation. Yes, thank you.
Very well said, Sergey. As a matter of fact, you took the words out of my mouth. It is devoid of, it is not psychological time. It's not human based. Very well said. Thank you so much. I'm going to move on to the next thing that he brings up, and this is the difference between coincidence and not coincidence. Now, David, I don't think he actually said this in the chapter, but he is really talking about coincidence or not. Coincidence would mean something that happens where there's no meaning attached. And when he says it's not coincidence, we're talking about what Carl Jung calls synchronicity, and that is a meaningful coincidence. So they're both coincidences, but one has meaning to us. He gave a couple of examples in the books. One, he said that he and his wife went to the show, and as they were driving to the movies, they were going to the movies, and as they were driving out of their driveway, they noticed that their neighbor was leaving at the same time. And when they came home 2 hours later, they noticed that their neighbor was returning at the same time. And I don't know if any of you have ever seen that, but that happens to me so many times. For example, when I'm going to the grocery store, somebody will walk in at the same time and I'll run into them at the similar time, and then we'll check out at the same time and leave at the same time. As any of that, and it doesn't seem to mean anything, but in a way it seems like this happens so frequently to me. I just wondered, have any of you had that experience of seeing people coming and going at the same time?
I can't recall.
Well, there's one that I noticed myself, and then he gave another example, and that was that he had been working, as I've mentioned before, David oversees a prison program, and he had been working with this one prisoner in this, the lessons that, I guess there's specific lessons for prisoners. And this person got out of prison, moved to Charlotte. He hadn't heard from him in a long time. And he ran across the file of this man, and he thought, I need to call him. And he put the file on his desk, but he didn't have time to call him. And he was home for the weekend, and he went back to work. And on Monday, there was a call from this person. And he says, is this a coincidence? Is this a meaning? Or is it synchronicity? This seems to have meaning. Well, I will say that in terms of psychic, if we look at the psychic aspect of it, and that is that we can communicate with people psychically, which I think that we certainly do. And there have been so many studies done on psychic phenomena. It has been proven more. Any drug that's on the market does not have as many blind studies tests as have been done on psychic phenomena, and all kinds of tests have been run over the years on psychic, because they keep dealing with the same thing. And a lot of the contemporary research that we do, we have one thing, research it, and then move on to the next thing. But the psychic stuff has been researched and researched and researched. So he does talk about synchronicity and it being meaningful. Now, it has some meaning because of connectivity, but there is even more synchronicity, I think, or meaningful coincidence. And that is that there are events in our lives that I think guide us, or there are events in our lives that respond to our need. One just very simple thing is that once I wanted a white coat, and I only had $10 in my budget for a white coat. And I thought, well, that seems kind of impossible that I can get, have a white coat, but I was for $10, but I was riding by a store and I had this strong urge to go into the store. And when I went into the store, there was a white coat for $10. And so is it synchronicity that I just decided to stop by the store that had the white coat that I needed? To me, it seems like it was. It seems like I had a need, and there was something that synced up time and space, and it synced us together. So any comments on coincidence or not coincidence?
That has happened to me. It's being at the right time, at the right place is another way of putting it.
Yes. So
But
have
that
you,
has-
so I think we probably are always at the right time at the right place, but there are times that it zings because it's got a deep meaning. Can you think of a time that that's happened for you?
I can't recall specific events right now, but I do recall, oh, wow, what good luck is the conclusion that I have reached.
Well, I want you to think about, everybody think about when you met either your partner, wife or husband, or a really good friend. And because of meeting them, your lives became totally different. Unless you had an arranged marriage and you didn't know the person before you got married. But let's just say, think back about it. For example, my husband, I met at a meeting and we just happened to go at the same time. And he had driven all the way across Houston and he normally didn't go there. And I had just moved into town. And of course, that one meeting just changed my life. And so, looking back at our relationships, then most of those were being in the right place at the right time to meet that person. Anybody have any, can tell us how you met someone and it was just kind of totally, I mean, you didn't plan that you're going to meet them. You just met them. Anybody have a story about that? Meeting someone significant by accident because you were in the same place at the same time.
Aren't all meetings that way, whether they end up good or bad?
I think they are. I think that it's the significance that gives it meaning to us, and that's what we're talking about: coincidence or not coincidence. I think that the point he's bringing out here was whether it has something that is meaningful to us. That's what defines it as synchronicity.
Yeah, I'd like to focus on that last one, the force at work. The force at work, I believe, is the thoughts. And all of this has to do with thought transfer. And so you transferring your thought, you're always acting and behaving based on your thought. So if your thought is strong enough, it transfers to your surrounding, and it go beyond time and space, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a perfect example is the stock market. If everyone is panicking, that thought become increased, and then they will start selling. Everyone is in euphoria, that thought is propagating among the world, and it becomes euphoria for everyone as well. So I believe the thing, the force at work here is the thought itself that drive the synchronicity, and cause these events to happen at the same time. And then the other aspect that I believe is controlling all this is karma itself. You certainly possess certain karma, and for those karma to come into fruition, to become real, these events need to happen at the same time so that you can achieve the karma, basically the result.
It's interesting you talk about the stock market, because when the stock market crashed in the 20s, a lot of people committed suicide. It wreaked havoc, but it wasn't that much longer. I think maybe it was in the 27 or something, 1927 or something like that, that the Japanese stock market crashed. And when that crashed, people just kind of went on their business, and they worked through it. And it wasn't like this big blight in the history of Japan. They just kind of went on. They didn't get all upset about it. You know, everything didn't fall apart like it did in the United States because of the way the psychological reaction to it. They didn't get, as you see, you know, all fired up and upset. For one thing, their identity wasn't as much with their possessions as it was for this in this culture. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question, which is, what is the false beacon of hope? And what's the answer to that?
Technology.
Technology is a false beacon of hope. You know, I've heard a lot of people say that, now Blavatsky wasn't really up with this, but in terms of the environment, people say, well, technology is going to take us out of it. Well, it's going to be more than technology. It's going to be our habits, and it's also going to be how we use technology as well, because technology is going to require somebody to implement it. It's going to require value system changes in terms of how we treat the planet. And you know, I think that technology itself is sometimes a false beacon of hope, because we know that, for example, it's been, for years, we have had the ability to create energy for practically nothing. And I mean, I read, gosh, it must have been 30 or 40 years ago, about how we had developed the ability to hide energy in another dimension. And this was in a regular newspaper. And that if we could store this energy in another dimension, then we could bring it out and use it at any time. But we've got things happening, like just last month in Texas, where most of you are, we had these energy shutdowns. And we really have the technology so that this does not have to happen. But because of the use of technology, or the non-use of available technology, this happened. And so he quotes Dickens in The Tale of Two Cities, and he says, polarity is here. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. We have peace and violence. So we have peace and violence coexisting. And I was going to read the story on page 74. And the master is speaking with the pupil, and the master says, how do you see when the sun goes down? Pupil says, in that case, I see by the moonlight. And the master says, how do you see when the moon is no longer present? The pupil said, when the moon is no longer present, I see by moonlight. I mean, by candlelight. The master says, and when you blow out the candle and there is no sun and there is no moon, and then no candle, how do you see then? And the pupil says, well, master, somehow I see by the light within. So do we put our faith in technology as if it can fix things? And what happens when intellectual brilliance is unmoored by spiritual values? So that's a question for you to comment on, if you would.
My answer is you crash and burn. Essentially, you crash and burn. Take an example, a perfect example, a race car, right? Technology is like a race car. It improves, it goes really fast. You can go really fast, but at the end of the day, if that someone is not at the wheel, you're gonna crash and burn a lot faster. That's what it is. So if you lack that spiritual value, that control the car, you're gonna crash and burn really fast.
That is a great analogy. Anybody else?
I think we should not undervalue what technology has brought us. I understand that we shouldn't put our faith in technology in terms of things that are psychological or beyond the mind. But in terms of bringing a lot of maybe comfort, a lot of things to the world, I think technology has been useful. Just consider even the smartphones. I mean, you can do more things around the world now than before. It has brought people together more than before. We know more about whatever is happening in other parts of the world than before. So I think, in a sense, it's bringing the world closer together in terms of, I mean, it has got its ills, but I think, in a way, from the physical point of view, it has been very, very helpful. And I also mention that, it has also been used for evil purposes.
And I think, John, that's why it says, what happens when intellectual brilliance is unmoored by spiritual values? It's not that technology hasn't advanced us in many ways. I mean, I give thanks for my computer and so many things that I could never do without the internet. However, what happens when it's unmoored by spiritual values? For example, it may not be the greatest thing to have all kinds of pornography sites out there. It may not be the greatest things that people substitute relationships with people by being on the internet all the time. Certainly during the pandemic, it's connected us more than it has divided us. But I mean, I think that's why we have that question, what happens when spiritual brilliance is unmoored by spiritual values?
What I'm feeling this question, that sometimes the IQ of our spiritual values, the intelligence of our spiritual values, always behind of our so-called technological, scientific development. It sounds ridiculous sometimes for me. We like to quote, start from Seneca, ancient Greek, then we start to quote Kant, moral ethic, Blavatsky, but you can look in our technological advance. We will probably never so often quote the mathematics of Pythagore or the law of Newton, even the theory of relativity of Einstein. And always spiritual development is far behind. And it's like a paradox. When we will have the balance between our technological achievements, what you mentioned, Zoom, computer, and with the same development and the same achievement and the same grade of our spiritual values. I think this is the greatest conflict. We will discuss the duration of time. We will discuss the ethics of French Revolution, but this is so far what we have now in technology. Maybe it's something how it's supposed to be. The technology always ahead, and then we have all this huge complication. What you mentioned, that we forget our personal relationship because we have Zoom. We forget what does it mean normal romantic conversation. We forget how to write a postcard in a handwriting. And it's simple question, but it's something something which will be the main point, how we catch up with our spiritual values, with our cosmological understanding of our insight, as you say, with all this technological advance, especially when the artificial intellect coming and want to change us or even replace. Thank you.
Yeah, you make some good points. I think what you're saying is that we have developed our intellect much more than we have developed our spiritual nature. And with every advance, with every new thing that comes into our culture, there's always a light and dark side. Everything has a shadow side. So it seems to be a dual-edged sword. Everything that comes in to help has this potential to harm as well. And we get to choose, will we bring this forth knowing that it can help or hurt, or will we suppress this? But I don't know that anything that we invent or we bring into being does not have that dual nature. And then you kind of take that a little further, Sergey, with that we're not developing spiritually as fast as we are developing intellectually. I am not sure. However, I have heard it said, and it seems like my experience, that there is an evolution of consciousness that has occurred. I began to work in the, in the 80s. And what we were working for really was an evolution of consciousness, that we would get together, and if we joined in mind and if we meditated, that there would be some kind of evolution of consciousness. And I thought that people would be, there would be this change, and it would be kind of this awakening, and people would come into consciousness and they would be excited about these esoteric concepts, and they would start studying spiritual stuff much more. But what I found is that there was a change, and there has been a change. I can see that the kinds of foods that we eat have changed, and we've gone to organic foods. But what I didn't realize was that this change of consciousness that was occurring wasn't like, here were the esoteric studies and people were going to come to it in the mystical traditions. What happened is that the mystical conditions and the spiritual stuff started moving into the mainstream. The mainstream didn't start funneling down over here to the kind of things we studied. What we studied filtered into the mainstream. Just for example, the word guru, you didn't hear that 50 years ago. That wasn't common. That's spoken in boardrooms now. We had these spiritual values and concepts have bled their ways into mainstream. The word holistic, in the early 80s, the word holistic was considered a subversive word. Really, I'm not joking. Now it's a part of most hospital programs. And so we have had something happen, and we also have had a movement away from non-duality into from duality into non-duality. We have, most of you have heard of non-duality, but I'd say 50 years ago, that wasn't in the common conversation. And even when I became aware of it in the 90s, really understanding the concept of non-duality, I could find very few people that I could discuss non-duality with. Now it's a street word practically. I mean, so many people understand it. So in my opinion, from the way I'm looking, there does appear to be some kind of awakening of consciousness. And so that might be a little different than what you see, Sergey, because what you see is true as well. It has been said that it takes a genius to be able to hold two equally opposing ideas and not be bantered about by those or have to choose between those things, because the truth is a lot bigger than what is suggested by the idea of a polarity.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you. It's like a renaissance of our spirituality. Let's see the products of this renaissance, like we have seen in 16th and 17th centuries in Europe, with brilliant paintings, poems, and sculptures. Yes, thank you. Renaissance of consciousness. Okay, thank you, Ian.
And something I've realized, within the past 3 to 5 years, is that there's a little bit more emphasis on programs that deals with diversity and inclusive. I mean, if you look at a lot of companies, they have programs on diversity and inclusion, which, you know, were not there maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah, but it's in the conversation, it's in the dialogue, and we're working on it. Whereas before it wasn't even on the table. Great thought. I don't really know what the time is because I forgot to put a clock here and my computer time is covered up, and I'm gonna, it's not a really long chapter.
It's 10:54 right now.
Okay. So we've been just 34 minutes. Okay, the next thing is what is called the ring pass not. And it's a very obscure term that Blavatsky uses in The Secret Doctrine. And this definition was given by De Rucker in his occult glossary. And that is, he talks about the ring to pass, and he brings up the whole concept of a circle represented by pi. And he defines this as those, what is around those that still believe in the illusion of separation. And this is a boundary that is not solid, but it cannot be crossed by any part of a person's conscious or subconscious mind that believes in separation. And he says it also applies to globes and planetary chains and solar systems, which I'm assuming these are the ones that Blavatsky talked about, and then NVIDIA gave us a talk on these recently. And also he equates this to animals, and it concerns their inability to exercise the power of reflective self-reflection. It relates to phases or states of consciousness. And then HPB says that the initiate knows the ring or the circle pass is not a location, and it is not anything that's measurable. So this is an interesting concept, because what it says is that our belief creates, a belief in separation creates an energy barrier so that we cannot move across. I'm going to go on to the next slide. It's also known as the circle pass not, and it's an allegorical circle within which all are confined for those that still harbor the illusion of separation. And so if it's allegorical, then it has no energetic presence. But I'm wondering if there is not an energetic presence. Let's see what the next slide is. Okay, no, so let's go back to this. So does anybody have any theories on this ring pass not? Have you heard about it? It is a very obscure term. Do you believe that this is allegorical? Do you believe that this has any energy presence? Do you believe that she was just making this up and it doesn't exist? What are your thoughts and comments about this?
Well, this is the first time I heard of this terminology. So before that, I don't know what it is, and I still have a difficult time grasping what she's saying. So is she describing like a plateau? For example, when you evolve to a certain point where it plateau out, that and then to move beyond that plateau, it takes a lot of energy and effort to move beyond that, and it's very difficult for you to move beyond that in terms of the evolution. Is that what she's describing, or this merging into the universal consciousness?
Well, you know, this brings up, when you say that, Tria, it brings up the thing, you know, I'm not sure that this is quite right, but, you know, before, I think it was a 4-minute mile barrier. Was it the 4-minute mile? No one had ever run a 4-minute mile. I think that was the number of minutes.
Yeah, it took a long time for any human to overcome that.
But when they did, a lot of people did, because all of a sudden what happened is the belief that it could not be done was broken. And so it broke this invisible barrier that was there, because all of a sudden what happened is bing, 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 bing. People were doing it everywhere. All of, just once that barrier was broken. And I'm wondering if the ring past knot is something like that. It's an invisible barrier, but once it's been broken, and that's what happens theoretically. That's what happens when people are around the guru. This guru knows who they are. And when someone gets in the presence of someone who knows who they are, and they see that, and that is, they are not separate. They don't believe in the world of separation, this illusion of separation, then this person can then move into the non-belief in separation, experience the oneness. So I'm thinking that that might be it. Any other comments? Because to me, again, this, until I read David's book, I was not familiar with the term. I think it's in The Secret Doctrine. I was trying to find it, and I couldn't find it. Mine is a Kindle copy. So anyone else want to comment on this? Maybe we'll call it a phenomenon. I'll tell you a story that might illustrate it, another story similar to the other one, but that is that I was once, I went to a fire walk. It's actually the second one I had ever been to. And the first one I went to, there was just a long program, and we demystified the fire walk, and we look at our belief systems, and we dealt with our fears. But the second firewall we went to, it was with a Native American woman, and she basically looked at us and she said, here's the firewall. Let me just tell you, you can walk on fire and it won't hurt you, and you can do this. Let me show you. I'm just gonna walk right across. She walked across the fire. And then she said, you can do it. So people just walked, and there was a little 8-year-old there, and the 8-year-old looked at me and said, can I do this? She said, is it safe? Is it okay? And I said, yes, you can do this. She walked right across. And it was this, the illusion that it was impossible was just dissipated, and that people were able to make easy breakthroughs. And it was fun. The difference between the two methods was one of them that, we were, for hours, we went through every possible fear that we had about it and all kinds of stuff. And then the other time it was like, you can do this. Let's all go. And everybody walked, and everybody was fine, and nobody got burned. But if I will tell you, if I had a fire in my backyard and it was 10 feet long, like the ones that I walked, or maybe longer than 10 feet, I wouldn't do it, because there would be that belief I'd get burned. But when there was a break in that belief, I was able to transcend that. So there was a barrier. There's a barrier I couldn't seem to cross by myself. Comments, thoughts?
I can over that barrier. I wouldn't be hesitant to walk on fire.
Say that again. What was the first sentence you said, Jamshad?
I said I wouldn't be able to overcome that barrier, the psychological barrier, and I would be afraid to walk on fire.
Right. Well, the first time that I thought I was going to have an opportunity, I went to a retreat center in California, and I was very excited about walking on fire. And for whatever reason, the fire walking person was not there, and I was so relieved, because I thought, oh, thank God, I won't come home and people will think you're a chicken, you didn't walk on fire. It's like, well, the fire walking master wasn't there, so I didn't have to do it. but years later I did do it. I did go to a workshop where you break the board. Have any of you ever been to one of those workshops where you break the board in two with your arm? Well, I went to the workshop and we put this board out, and my best friend goes, flap, she's right through the board. And then I go and I go, and mine does not break. And it like hurts so bad. And so the next time they said, oh, go on and try it again. You can do it. Flap, my hand does not break through the board. And so we go home and my friend looks at my arm and she said, what's wrong with your arm? And I said, it was totally black where it had hit the board. Now, the next time it happened was I was in California and I was leading a workshop. And I was one of the speakers at this conference, and we kind of all did something together. And one of the speakers did this board breaking thing. And so all of the kind of leaders got up in front, and I was one of them. And they said, now we're all going to break boards. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh crap, I've got all these people that are here as students of mine, and I'm going to get here. And I have a history of not being able to break the board. And I just went, okay, whatever happens, these people can do it, I'm going to do it. So I went like that, and the board broke. And I kept that board for so many years, probably until I moved here, because I broke that barrier, that, the belief that I couldn't break the board. But the first time I could not break that barrier.
Yeah, when my son was in Taekwondo, before they can move from, let's say, a white belt to a yellow belt, or from yellow belt to a blue belt, they have to break a board. And I was surprised that most of the kids did it. It didn't hurt them. But if you ask me to do it, I don't think I can do it.
I think it's all driven by your mind, right? Your mind itself is separate from the union of all. So the moment you were born, your mind already identified the I-ness. So that thought of I being separated from the whole, that's always be there. So if you don't have that delusion of separateness, then that mind won't be there, right? It's kind of like killing the mind before you can become the whole.
That's kind of what you said about the last thing too. It all comes down to the mind. Remember, you said that before on the last question. So it pretty much may be the answer to everything. Anyone else have any thought about breaking through a barrier, an invisible barrier? These all we've been talking about, these are invisible barriers. Do you believe you can break the board through, or not believe it? But the barrier that she's talking about is the largest barrier that we have, and that is the belief that we're separate from everything else. We're a separate individual. We are the I. The story of me is the story of my life. Okay, I'm going to move on. So is Theosophy too abstract? One of the major complaints is that Theosophy is not practical. Are there benefits of addressing the abstract concepts that deal with universal principles? And much of Theosophy does not deal with empirical data. And reading, these are points that he has made, and reading The Secret Doctrine challenges us. Is Theosophy too abstract?
Yes or no? Well, some parts are very abstract to me, but some parts are very practical.
But aren't all religions abstract? Whether they're Abrahamic or Eastern?
If you codify something, it is abstract, but I think there are people, and the mystics are the people that deal with the non-abstract, the direct experience. You know, the religion, there is the story of the direct experience of who we are, and then there is the direct experience of who we are. The story is the religion, the story of who I am, the story of how everybody became who they were, the ways, what can we do to make ourselves believe that we are who we are? How can we break the barrier? And the other one is just the direct experience of who I am. And that's the mystical side. I will say that Theosophy, I don't know that this is a fair question, because Theosophy does a really good job of balancing things out. If you look at the programs that are given by Theosophy, and also I think he probably mentions like the Quest magazine, all of these things are presenting a rounded perspective so that we can know, you know, how does this happen in everyday life? We have the Theosophical Order of Service, which says, how can we give? How can we alleviate suffering? I mean, that's one aspect of it. That's very practical. And Annie Besant, I think, founded the Theosophical Order of Service. We have lodge meetings in which, or meetings like this, in which we look at all kinds of different topics from different ways, and we try to bring it home to ourselves. So maybe we may not, there may be things that we don't understand, but it doesn't mean that we stop right there and say, okay, I quit. We all seem to have this thirst that keeps bringing us back, bringing us back, bringing us back. So the teachings have never been put aside. They've always been there. They've been looked up to. They've been referred to. They haven't been denigrated. And if someone says, I don't understand that, another theosophist says, well, move to something that works for you right now. And, you know, this is not a theosophy. It's not something where you have to believe everything or know everything, and where you are so open to question everything. And so I am not sure that this is the right question to ask. Because the question might be, how can I understand the concepts that I don't understand might be a question. What resources are there that can help me understand these? And I think a lot of people, there's so many people, they read something, and I mean, I bet you do. You read something you don't understand, you look it up in the TS Wiki, you refer to another book. You know, Pablo translates so many things. Michael Gomes does. I mean, Joy Mills, all these people have commented on these doctrines, and we learn so much from them. Comments?
Maybe, and I have a short question. Can you at least try identify the definition of the word abstract? Because if we will not find the similar understanding, what does it mean abstract, we cannot go further, because I'm sure everybody of us put in the word abstract not the same meaning, but some nuance, and in this nuance we can be lost. Abstract. Definition of abstract from philosophy, theosophy, psychology, sociology, or common sense. Abstract.
Well, I'm thinking that what we're talking about here in terms of abstract is something that in the next sentence you said, much of theosophy does not deal with empirical data. It's things that cannot be proven. They can't be measured. They, because and to me, that's like the mystical aspects. I mean, for example, I mean, love is an abstract. You can try to define it, but that's just words to try to describe a state of consciousness. Love is very abstract. We talk about universal oneness.
Yeah.
The words are abstract. Now, universal oneness itself is not abstract. It's if we experience it, but the words are abstract for sure. You can't measure that at present. I mean, we thought that everything was abstract about learning about psychic phenomenon, but it's, you know, they brought it down to measurable things. They put gizmos on people's head and have them meditate and see changes in their brain. We've been able to measure things that used to be abstract, but now they're more empirical. I'm going to go on because this actually continues a little bit, Sergey. This, I think, will add more to it. And that says that modern science uses inductive method of reasoning, but Blavatsky reminds us that for initiates that the deductive method is the preferred mode of inquiry. And then I'll quote, and it said, it must be remembered that the study of occultism proceeds from universals to particulars and not the reverse as accepted by science. As Plato was an initiate, and he used the inductive method, he naturally used the former method, while Aristotle never had been initiated. Sorry, I have some typos in here. Scoffed at his master and elaborating a system of his own, he left it as an heirloom to be adopted and improved by Francis Bacon. I'm going to continue on to the next slide. You know what? So Aristotle's methodology. Aristotle started documenting deductive reasoning in the 4th century BC. And René Descartes, in his book Discoursive Method, refined the idea for the scientific revolution. So let's take a look at just some instances of deductive reasoning versus inductive reasoning. And so here is an example of deductive reasoning. All people are mortal. Joan is a person. Therefore, Joan is mortal. And for deductive reasoning to be sound, of course, everything that we use to deduct the truth has to be the hypothesis. To prove the hypothesis has to be true. It has to be real. So it has to be that that all people are mortal has to be a true statement, and Joan is a person has to be a true statement too. So let me look at this. Whoops. Oops. Sorry, I keep doing the same thing. I keep pressing the wrong mouse thing. I think I'm just going to skip this one anyway. So inductive reasoning would be every year we get a thunderstorm in May, and since it is May, we will get a thunderstorm. And so Blavatsky says this is not really the best way to discover the truth. Well, so let's go back to, I'm sorry, this is the next section. Well, no, this is the end of this section. Nothing in the world remains the same. As sailors of old view their glaze on the pole star above in order to navigate the restless ocean above, students of the ageless wisdom fix their sights on the eternal verities as they traverse the ever-changing and sometimes tumultuous sea of life. What can be more practical than that? So what we're saying here is that there are truths that we can discover that can guide our lives. And what can be more practical than that? And so I'm asking you to think about something that maybe you have learned in your discovery of Theosophy that has become a guiding light for you. Can you think of something that, or maybe it has become a comfort for you during trying times? What concepts carry you through? Can any of you think of any examples of this? And if you want to comment on using the inductive or the deductive method, please feel free to comment on that as well. And that is basically that Blavatsky said it is easier to take a universal principle and to apply it to our lives than to try to screen through a lot of different facts and try to develop a universal principle for that. That is just her take on that.
I like the one saying, where there's a will, there's a way.
Mhm.
I think that what has been very helpful to me is the three truths that can be found in the Light on the Path. And it says the principle that lives in us is eternal. It is not heard or seen, but it can be perceived by those who desire it to be perceived. And that each person is his own absolute lawgiver, a dispenser of truth, and so on. And that the spirit in us is eternal, and its future is a thing that have no limit. And I guess that is, from that, a lot of things can flow down.
Thank you. Thank you, John. There are other concepts that I think that people find comfortable or help a sense of safety, and that is the sense of karma and also reincarnation, that those seem to be helpful to people who are coming out of traditional religions. They feel very comforted by those thoughts. And then there's a point in which even the universal principles lose their effectiveness, because I think it's when we are in a separated sense of consciousness that we need those belief systems. When we pierce that illusion that we're separate, we really don't need any kind of belief systems. We don't need any formats, because we're just experiencing the thing that we've been trying to experience. So it's the idea of moving from being a seeker to being a finder. When we're a seeker, what we do is that we study and we do a lot of things to be able to open that door of consciousness. But once the door is open, then we don't have to try to be mapping out a path to the door all the time. We can just be present and through the door and in the light. And sometimes the door seems to open and close, in which we seem one and then we seem separate. So the universal principles, as I see it, are like bridges. When you go across a bridge, you don't have to stop and worship the bridge. You don't have to measure the bridge. You don't have to figure out how it was constructed. What we do is we continue to go on. So the universal principles can act as a bridge to take us past the illusion of separation. But once we move past the illusion of separation, they're not necessary. It doesn't mean that they're not true, but they're not necessary because they're the bridge of consciousness.
And can what I said about the three truths, I just said it from my mind.
Yeah.
But I just Google it, and if you don't mind, I can read the three truths.
Okay, great.
So these are the three truths as found in the Ideal of the White Lotus, And that the first truth, the soul of man is immortal, and its future is the future of a thing whose growth and splendor has no limit. The second truth, the principle that which gives life dwells in us, and without us is undying, eternally beneficent, is not heard or seen or smelt, but is perceived by the man who desires perception. And the last one, each man is his own absolute lawgiver, the dispenser of glory or gloom to himself, the decreer of his life, his reward, his punishment. So those are the three.
Hey, John, can you please put the link in the chat? Thank you.
Where can I find this link? Okay, I'll try to.
All right.
Yeah, if you put the link in the chat, we could pull it up on screen.
Okay, I'm trying to.
I will tell you that the Oh Hidden Light by Annie Besant absolutely, which is universal, pulls me through. That is just so powerful for me. Oh, hidden light, vibrant in every atom. It's just, and I don't know that I can quote it because I always get the ones, oh, hidden love. I kind of get them mixed up when I say them, which is which, but when I read it, it's just absolutely wonderful. While John's getting that up, does anybody else have any? How about there is no religion higher than truth? Knowing that when Blavatsky wrote that the word religion was not what we think of about religion. It was more like religio. It was more like the binding back. Religion was that brings us back into that state of oneness, not what traditional religion is today. So as we just experience ourselves and our breath, we're going to wait for John to put this up. I think it would be nice to put that.
Yeah, I think I just sent it.
Okay, so it's in the chat.
I don't know.
Oh, where is my chat? I'm not. Does anybody else see? Tria, do you see it?
Yes, I see it.
I don't know what. Let's see. Maybe if I pause the share.
If you stop sharing, it's easier. If you stop sharing,
Okay.
then
Okay,
you-
there's the chat. Okay, so the
Yep.
chat will go into that. Whoops, didn't hit the whole. Okay, now let me start the share. Let's see. Now I can start the share. Okay, so I'm going to read those again. Or John, do you want to read those again now that we have them in front of us? This will be a little easier for us to
No,
maybe
I
see.
can read it.
Okay, the soul of man and woman is immortal, and its future is the future of a thing whose growth and splendor has no limit. The principle which gives life dwells in us and without us, is underlying and eternally beneficent, and is not heard or seen or smelt, but is perceived by humans as who desire perception. Kind of laughing at the word smelt, since we say, we don't use that word too much now. Each person is his or her absolute lawgiver, the dispenser of glory or gloom to themselves, the decreer of their lives, their reward or their punishment. These truths are as great as life itself, are as simple as the simplest mind of humans. feed the hungry with them. So this looks like a good, oh, okay, this is from this is International Headquarters webpage. Thank you. So I'm gonna see if I can move back to, I'm not quite sure how to do this.
Just on share, and then you can go back to your slides.
Yeah, I'm trying to. I think I better just stop the share because I don't think I know how to do it unless I, here we go. And so the last section is on untimely departures. How do we feel about people who leave life when they're very young? Is it a tragedy? It does seem so on our side. He mentions John Keats, who died on his 25th birthday, leaving the legacy of Ode to a Grecian Urn. I don't know if any of you were curious enough to look Ode to a Curious Urn up. I know that I read it either in high school or college English, and I'm sure I had a different perspective of that. I did not have the internet, and so when I read it this time, I was able to get a lot of insights that I probably did not have when I was young. And it is quite an amazing piece, and he wrote that before he was 25. And then Percy Shelley died at 29. He authored Prometheus Unbound, which was said to be one of the finest he was said to be one of the finest lyric poets of his time. Emily Bronte died at age 30, but her book Wutherington Heights, that has been made into movie after movie. I think there was even a series about, they've made many series out of it. And then Schubert managed to write 10 symphonies, 11 string quartets, and assorted chamber music before he died at age 31. Whoops. Mozart, so many works, and he never saw age 36. Johannes Vermeer passed away at 43. And even 300 years after his death, the movie with Colin Firth, A Girl with a Pearl Earring, was produced. I think I saw that movie too.
Mm-hmm.
And so this brings up a tremendous controversy. What if these deaths were planned or preordained? So what we're talking about here is predestination. What do you have to say about predestinations? Do you think that lives are set by, and the number of years is set in our lives, or do you believe that they're determined as we go along by way of consciousness? In the Mahatma letter 68, obscure references are made to the idea that the soul comes into incarnation destined to live a certain period of time, an idea that seems to be compatible with the idea that each incarnation has a purpose. Could it be that the life of Mozart or Keats was intended to grace the stage of life for just a few years, just long enough for them to bestow their wisdom? I want to bring up another little thing into this. Can't remember where I read this. I think it was in a book called Under the Golden Sun, but it talks about the Brightwishy Horoscopes. And these horoscopes were written 5,000 years ago. And there are many, many of these horoscopes. And they said they had written the horoscope of every person that was to live. And you can go to where these are and you can look at your horoscope, but not many people find them. But the story that I read was a couple of them. This one woman went and she found she was a spiritual teacher, and she found her horoscope, and it said that she would be born in a country, and it said something like Canu, but she was actually born in Canada, and that country did not exist at the time that the horoscopes were written, and it said that she would be a spiritual teacher and that she would dance, and that's what she did in her lifetime. Another man who found his horoscope. Now you got, there's thousands of them, so not many people find their horoscope, but it said, you will come on a certain day, there will be two others there on the same day that you are, and you will find your horoscope on such and such date, and that you'll read it. And on that day he came, and that there were two other people with him, and he found his horoscope. And so these horoscopes are very famous, and people go and they find that their life was written out and what they would do 5,000 years ago. That certainly points to reincarnation. I mean, not reincarnation, but predestination.
But the horoscope is for which incarnation?
For the one that now,
Okay.
this life, the lifetime that they were, whoever found it, it was for the lifetime that they were living now.
Okay.
Because I guess somebody could have gone 100 years ago and they may have found their horoscope then. But I did find it interesting that the one person said, you will come in the year of such and such, and you will, or maybe the decade, but it gave kind of a time frame, and two other people will come with you and you will find your horoscope. And it just happened exactly like that. I can attest that this is all true. I read in a book that it seemed that it was very true. I think if you look them up, you can find out about them. And I'm not sure that I'm pronouncing them exactly correctly. I will say that when I read that, it gave me pause. Some people in the East say that we have a certain number of breaths, that is how long our life will be. And if we breathe long breaths, that we will have a longer life. And if we breathe short breaths, and short breaths are usually breaths of fear, and they're breaths of holding life out. And if we breathe short breaths, that our lives will be shorter. However, what I'm interested in is just to see what people have to say. If you have any comments about the idea of predestination. They're calling it preordained, but predestination.
Well, I know two people who passed away at a relatively young age. And I think they came in this life to serve their mother. And once the mother passed away, they also passed away within a couple of years. So I think that was their duty in this lifetime.
Did you say when they passed away, their mother passed away, or when their mother passed away, they passed away?
No, they came to serve their mother. So once they finished serving the mother passed away. Then within 2 years, they also passed away after the mother passed away.
That brings up an interesting point. They say that when you lose someone that's really close to you, the next year after their death is there's a tendency for people to die. There's a high percentage of people that die within a year of when their spouse or their beloved has died. And that, you think that maybe is tied to a broken heart, but could it be, like you said, Jamshed, could it be tied to this predestination or this service of what they were supposed to do?
Yeah.
Good point.
So there are some speculations or some teachings that say that when you are born, basically the time of your death is known. At the same time, we know that Blavatsky's life was lengthened a little bit so that she can finish the work that she wanted to do. So, it's questioned. There are a lot of questions about it. Because if you know that your expiration date is this date, then what will you do?
Really, he wants to know. If you don't know what John is referring to, I think he's referring to that when Blavatsky was in a lot of physical pain and suffered, I think, because she had problems with her kidneys, And she went to the masters who would heal her temporarily and kind of give her a fix, and then she would go back out. And one time they said to her, do you want to continue? You can end it now if you want to, or we can patch you up and send you back out. She said, I want to go back out. I want to finish what I came here to do. Is that what you're referring to, John?
Yes.
Yeah. And so that kind of puts a little dent in this idea of predestination, that her time was, she was given a choice. Then we've got these near-death experiences that a lot of people seem to have. They don't really die, but they get so close to death that they have a transformation of their lives, and it's almost like they're new people when they are born. I've always personally not believed in predestination. I've thought that we create our lives as we go, and it continues. However, there is but I don't know that that's true. I have no idea. It's just my belief. I do know that in psychology, we used to do what's called life script analysis. And one of the questions that we would ask our clients when they came in was, at what age do you think you will die, and how will death occur? And that was a very important question, because if the person said, I've always thought that I was going to die at age 50 of a heart attack, we start saying, well, that's something that we want to look at, because you're probably creating something like that. Or probably will never live to be older than my mother. But there was one particular client that came in, and she was pregnant. And it was my partner who had her as a client. And she said, her answer was, I've always thought that I would die at 35 and I would die in a car accident. And that week, and she was 35, and that week she was in a car accident. She did not die, but she was 35. And my partner said, I cannot believe, because there's a lot of questions in that questionnaire. She said, I can't believe that I didn't stop her at that point and say, we need to really look at this. We need to look at this. And Eric Berne, who's the founder of transactional analysis, died at age 65. And I had a therapist, and he was also a trainer. And he looked up to this man so much. He looked up to Eric Berne. And Eric Berne had this belief he was going to die at age 65, and he did. And then this other therapist who looked up to Eric Berne died at 65 as well. He was looking at him as a mentor, and that's how long he lived. And Elvis died, on the birthday of his mother or something like that. I mean, there are all kinds of strange synchronicities with these deaths.
Let's return back to the of presentation to the word. And you mentioned our time of when we leave this material world, it's psychological time. But if we configurate what does it mean duration, and what does it mean different understanding of time, the word of where we will go, it will be not the time when we will physically or wherever find something better word. Maybe we will go to another different dimension. I never hear in your presentation the word dimension. It's different layers of dimension. And maybe when we say we will move to different dimension and move away from this word karma, predestination, maybe we will get deeper to the meaning of the word duration and all the concept of Blavatsky of the no time and no space.
Thank you, Sergey. I think I actually was using the word realities, that we could go into different realities. I'd mentioned that there are maybe multiple simultaneous realities. I didn't use that word, but I was using realities the same way that you're using the word dimensions, that there are other realities that we could bleed into. And that's an interesting concept. What I think you're saying is that we might end in this dimension, but then go into another dimension and just continue a life along in another life. Is that what you're saying, Sergey?
Yes, something like this, but sometimes if we too deep start to predict our human hours, our psychological time, we get more and more not to so-called metaphysical understanding or exoteric understanding or transcendental understanding. We start to be dragged by our own day-by-day life. But I think that our main desire to go to the one, in what form, I don't know. But let's shake all this sand, what we have on our sandals, something like this.
Okay, I'm not sure exactly that I understood all of that. What I did,
Yeah, I just say that maybe let's not connect it with our day-by-day life and look, as you say, in a light would stay above of us, something like this. Yeah.
let's not look at what in our daily life. You're saying let's not look at the length of a life in terms of.
Let's not look on our day-by-day life. Let's to catch up the guiding light of the universe or whatever. This is my point. Yeah.
Well, okay. We are.
I think Sergey is trying to say that perhaps, you know, we possess different vehicle. We have different bodies. Of course, there's a physical body, there's a astral body, there's a mental body, and so on. So basically, the preordained something that is objective that we can observe in the physical body. For example, everyone know when someone die, the physical body die. However, there's the astral body and the mental body as well. Perhaps these are preordained for the physical body, but not so much preordained for the astral body and the mental body, where, you know, the higher mental live on, and perhaps in the higher mental there is still lesson to be learned, and then the preordained physical life, even though it has already ended, they end early, but then perhaps they have more time to spend in the higher mental body where they can learn and evolve much more rapidly, for example.
Yes, something like this. Of course, it can be different configuration, but you basically express what I try to say. Thank you.
Very interesting. Thank you, Triet. Thank you so much.
So another wrinkle on this is that it's said that if, for instance, you smoke, you reduce your lifespan by a few years. So what does what does it mean that, oh, you are going to spend, let's say, 90 years here? And does it mean that maybe even the smoking was part of the lessons that you're supposed to learn? I don't know. So it's just something for us to discuss.
Well, that's a little bit like what Sergey was pointing to, and that is when the questions are asked, it depends on which paradigm or which dimension we're talking about.
I mean, the physical dimension.
Well, what I mean is, yeah, we're talking about some questions are talking about the spiritual, some are talking about the physical dimension as well. Because, you know, what this is basically saying is, could it be in the spiritual dimension that that has determined the length of the physical dimension? And probably it doesn't have anything to do with whether we smoke or not, but in the limited perception that we have, all of these things make a difference. You know, whether you exercise or not, ultimately, that really doesn't make a difference. But in the imminent experience we have of being in a physical body, it does make a difference. You know, whether we take care of our body or not. I mean, it's said that Ramana Maharshi, when he was very young, he sat in caves and he meditated, and people made fun of him. So he went into a cave and he meditated. There were rats, that he had bug bites. He didn't eat that much. And that later physically, he had a lot of challenges because of the damage that was done to his body. I mean, did it matter to him or not, it didn't really matter because he really existed as a non-separate consciousness, but his physical body did suffer. Ultimately, he got cancer, and he left this plane with cancer. But he wasn't really affected by that physically. That wasn't his stick. He wasn't a human body. That wasn't what he was living his life as a human body. He was living himself as an illuminated spiritual being. So if I'm talking about being an illuminated spiritual being, the whole dialogue is different than I'm talking about being a physical body and how it affects it, and even the length of time that I'm here. More comments, thoughts?
Yeah, I believe our lifespan on Earth in the physical body is preordained because when we were sent down here to live this life, there's a certain karma load, right? There's a lower karma that we had to experience, and it's an opportunity for us to learn. Once we have learned that and developed that, once that lesson is done, then our lifespan on Earth is over. And then we got to spend the remaining time in the other plane to learn a different lesson and not so much, be burdened by the physical Earth.
I don't know if this question can be answered. Because we can all have our opinions on it, but I don't know if there is a true answer to this, because it's hypothesis. I think that everything we say is hypothesis. I mean, I think even karma is a hypothesis. It's one that works really well. It seems to be very thought out. There seem to be, you reap what you sow. It seems to be threaded through many religions. Yet, in non-duality, they said that karma doesn't exist. The moment that we enter in this situation of non-separation, karma loses its hold on us. So when we shift paradigms and we change teachings, we come to different conclusions. None of them are right or wrong, and we can believe whatever we want. However, I will say that they are all beliefs. Some choose to believe everything somebody says that they look up to, and some choose not to believe them at all. Who's right, who's wrong, I don't know. It does seem to be comforting to come up with different trains of thought that we can count on. Yet, whenever we make that change, whenever we move from the state of duality to non-duality, and that one unseparated state of consciousness, we leave everything behind. Because inculcated in the story of me and the belief that I'm a separated consciousness, I have all kinds of beliefs that I'm going to operate from. But when we make that transcendence, everything falls away. They have been wonderful bridges, but they're not ultimate truth. I'm going to see if I'm not sure whether this is the last slide or not. Yeah, that was the last slide, so I'm going to stop sharing. So that's what I have. I don't know if anyone else has anything that they would like to add or comment, because what I say, don't even take what I say to be truth. This is the truth as I know it, as I believe it. And so that's what I will share. It doesn't really make that the truth. It just makes it what I share.
That's what Buddha said also.
He said what?
Don't believe what I am telling you.
Okay. I wrote the second book I wrote was about it's called EZosophy, and it's letting go of ego-driven struggle and suffering. And somebody read my book and they said, "Oh my gosh, you must be a Buddhist." And it's like I had read no Buddhism, so I started reading Buddha, and I went, "Oh heck, he came up with all of this before I did." Oh. Other comments or thoughts? Oh, there's Ronald. Didn't know you were there because I didn't have everything. I couldn't see who all was on the call.
Well, I just want to comment on what James just said about what the Buddha said, that we shouldn't believe in what is written in and sacred books. We shouldn't believe in what is people, some holy people have said, but we should always think for ourselves. And if it's reasonable, then we should abide, or we should use those teachings to help us. So I think the Buddha emphasized the idea of thinking for ourselves, making your own decisions, and so on. And I think that's what we really need nowadays.
And a lot of people are born into a religion and they don't question it. And then they have a crisis of faith when they realize that they bought a religion that they don't embody. They don't really, they have not had any direct experience of it and its words. And they've been words that they were afraid not to believe because everybody believed. There's a consensus reality around us with people that believe the same thing. And so we thought it was the truth. And when we have experiences that are contrary to that truth, our lives break apart. We have what's called the dark night of the soul. And then we move into, and we may move into that faith, but it's with a different understanding than we had before when it was an intellectual choice or non-choice, because we were just, it was a habit of the people around us and we imbibed into that habit.
Hi all. Thank you, Anne, for very good job to do the presentation today, and thank you everybody with all the good idea. Yes, Buddha say that you don't need to believe him, but look at what he's teaching and the way he do, and then keep practicing. And if you think that is the way, that is the right way for you, and then keep doing it until you get the enlightenment. We enjoyed it. Sorry, we are driving, so we cannot give a lot of comment, but it's a very good meeting. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you. And I need to leave too, because I've got something in a few minutes myself. And so I want to thank you for being here. And
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I
Thank
will
you, Anne.
upload the recording later. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
You're a great facilitator.
Thank you.
Hey, Elena, how are you?